My name is Don, and my wife and I were married in 1968. We finally settled in Laurel, Maryland, where we first really got back into church. We were at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Laurel. Aaron was born and baptized in that church. And once I got out of the Army, we moved back up to outside of Baltimore and became active in my wife's home church. And that's where we really got into working our finances around the church. We realized, having been active in administration, that giving for a lot of people was what was left at the end of the month. We had been paid monthly, we've been paid bi-weekly. It was a challenge to balance our finances, but what we decided was the church would come first. This is back in the days where we had weekly envelopes, and my wife insisted on writing a check for each week at the beginning of our pay period.
Growing up, I remember vividly that my mom would write all the bills on a little notebook. This was before bill pay. And I didn't really know like percentages, or I didn't know what the word first fruits meant, but I always know that like church and charitable giving was at the top of the list. And it was usually one of the biggest numbers. As I got to be an adult and Tim and I started making decisions about charitable giving, I remembered that. It was a model. We didn't talk about it a lot, but I just watched it and saw my parents in action. I think of generosity a little bit as an act of resistance. A resistance against kind of the ethic of scarcity, my need to be afraid. If I am kind of feeling hopeless or in despair, generosity actually lifts me. It connects me with people. I think a little bit about what Pastor Michael says in the benediction, where it's, see one another, hear one another, care for one another, love one another. It's just that easy and it's just that hard. And that's kind of what generosity is. The work that the collective is doing is countercultural. We're fully affirming, we're radically welcoming. We are not just trying to welcome people who have been harmed by the church, but we are actively working to not be harmful as a faith community. And so supporting an organization and a community like the collective is just really important to me. And I was excited that Dad wanted to be part of it too.
And the reason I wanted to be part of it is because this is a church that is affirming. It backs up the words with action. Frankly, the unstructured part, where the term pop-up worship is a little bit of a misnomer, but it's not like this is a building that people go to. This is a people-oriented organization.
Well, what an inspiring video from the Heath Murphy family. We made this video last year, and I think we actually showed it at our service last November, but I think it's a video that's still really relevant today, and I'm so excited that we get to share it. My name is Michael Schulte. I'm the pastor here at the Collective, and I just want to say that we're so glad that you're here worshiping with us, and we hope that as you worship with us today, you get to experience God and all of God's abundance right here in our midst. And as I reflect on this video we just watched from Don and Aaron, I'm not going to lie, I find the way that Don and his late wife, and now Aaron and Tim, how they structure their finances with the church and charitable giving coming first, I find that to be very challenging. And maybe you do too. Financial generosity is not a spiritual practice that comes easy to me. I'm always preparing, I'm always scared of that next financial emergency, that next disaster. It's hard for me to be generous because I never feel financially secure, even when I am secure. And I'm going to give you this example here when I was really making big money. So when I was a teacher, I made around $50,000 a year, which was a lot of money in Memphis, Tennessee. And back then, I saved or invested more than a third or 30% of my take-home pay every single year. And after 1 year of savings, I had enough money to put a down payment on a house, a 3-bedroom house, a newly renovated 3-bedroom house in Memphis. And just guess how much that costs, right? Well, in Memphis, it cost $81,000. And that would never happen in Atlanta. It's a totally different universe there in Memphis. And for 2 years, I was able to rent the other 2 bedrooms of my house out to my friends, and the rent that they paid was more than the mortgage payment. So here I was, I'm a teacher, I'm making $50K, I have no house payment, I have no car payment, I had more than enough. But if you talk to my friends in Memphis, they'll tell you that I was the cheapest MFer in the entire friend group. And they would use that word. I had more disposable income back in Memphis than I do now, and yet back then, even when I had extra money, anxiety would well up in my chest every time I made a purchase. That does not mean that I didn't give, because I did. I would often make year-end donations to charitable organizations. But I did not give to these organizations out of a spirit of generosity. I gave because my dad told me there was a tax advantage and I wanted to maximize my annual refund. I was an anxious giver. I would give, but only because it benefited me, and that's not really generosity. That's not really living into God's abundance, the belief that God has created this world with more than enough for everyone, more than enough for all of us in this room, more than enough for me, more than enough for you, more than enough for all. And like Aaron said in the opening video, generosity is an act of resistance. It's a message which generosity resists the messages of this world. Messages that the world tells us are things like, hoard what you have, you will never have enough. You can't share with other people. They need to earn it. You don't owe them anything. Or look out for yourself, because when you're down, no one is going to take care of you. And these messages of scarcity, these messages of there won't be enough, they stand in direct contrast to the gospel message of Jesus. They're a result of a perverse world which prioritizes the individual, the ego, over communal well-being. I think there's a really great vision for generous giving, for living into God's abundance, for sharing what we have in Acts chapter 2. Acts 2 reads that all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, any who had need. And I do want to acknowledge just for a minute here that it's probably unlikely that every early Jesus follower had everything in common with one another. That was probably not exactly true. Maybe for a tiny few moments when the Spirit came down at Pentecost, they all were in agreement with one another. But as we see in the book of Acts, just several chapters later, Acts highlights some contentious arguments between prominent Jesus followers, a reminder that even in the most intentional, even in the most generous communities, they're still going to have some internal conflict inside of them. And yet what we see here in Acts 2, the important piece, is that the early Jesus followers give us a model for abundant living. They believed that together they had more than enough. They had confidence in God's provisions, even though they did not have that much. And when one community member in the early Jesus movement, when they needed something, other people stepped in to meet their needs. In modern terms, it might sound something like this. If someone lost their job, community members would rally alongside them to help them make rent or pay for the groceries. Or if someone had a surprise medical expense that they could not afford, they would take money out of the communal offering and they would pay for it. This is generosity. This is abundance. But it's more than that too, because this group of early Jesus followers, they also dined together. They broke bread at tables where there was more than enough food to go around. Food for those that the Roman Empire despised. It was a reminder that even though they lived in a world that did not love them like they deserved to be loved, that together at this table they were enough and they had enough. And if you keep reading in the book of Acts past this chapter 2, you're going to see that early Jesus followers have sort of a penchant for welcoming different types of people to dine with them at the table. They invite Gentiles, extending the Jesus movement outside of Jews. They invite Ethiopians. They invite women. They invite eunuchs. Early Jesus followers recognized, quote, the wonderful diversity of God's creative intention. That recognition of God's creative intention, that is generosity, that is abundance. There is more than enough for everyone. There is more than enough for you. And at the Collective, we really seek to model these early Jesus followers. We seek to be generous. We seek to practice abundance. And we do this one way by doing the same thing, recognizing the diversity of God's creative intent. We believe in building longer tables and having inclusive theology. So when we share meals together downstairs, we don't turn away people. You don't have to come to worship to eat the meal. We don't turn away neighbors who live without homes on our property. We break bread with every single person who walks through the door. And we also practice generosity through our giving. We model what a healthy, generous financial practice might look like. Through our Abundance Fund, the Collective gives away $10,000 of our offerings to individuals and nonprofit organizations that do important work in Atlanta and beyond. And this year, we've already been able to give more than $7,500 to neighbors and nonprofit organizations. We've supported trans housing initiatives. We've supported refugee resettlement. We've supported outreach to our unhoused neighbors in downtown Atlanta. And we also have been able to set aside money to support members of our community who are in seminary or who are considering becoming pastors or deacons in the Lutheran Church. We've provided tuition assistance and book scholarships. And today, that fund to help people who are attending seminary in our church, that has a surplus of $2,000. And so in the last week, the Collective's board has unanimously voted to reallocate those funds from the first quarter of our Abundance Fund and to give them to the Atlanta Food Bank. And so tomorrow we'll be making, as the Collective, a $2,000 donation to the Atlanta Food Bank to help them increase their food supply as they begin to serve families who have lost SNAP benefits. And we're committed to making another donation in December, donating 10% of our quarter four offerings to the Atlanta Food Bank. This really is generosity. This really is abundance, because you see, most churches don't give like this, and the Collective does, and we, quite frankly, we can't even afford a full-time pastor. My position, it's grant funded. We don't pay a single cent towards it. However, we do set aside money for the future, and we give generously to our neighbors because we believe that we can do both things at the same time. We can do two things at once. We can both save to become a sustainable faith community, and we can model generous financial giving in our church governing practices by giving 10% of our offerings away to people who need it. So at the Collective, we don't let our fear of the future cloud God's call to share our resources with those who need it the most. That's how the Collective, albeit very imperfect, that's how we model our abundance to the world. So if we return to the original question today, how can you as an individual or a family unit, how can you exemplify generosity in your life? And I want to lay out a few examples. You could definitely do it like the Heath Murphy family. You could practice a biblical tithe. Tithing means you're giving 10% of your take-home pay to the church or a charitable organization. Essentially, how that works is you take the amount of money that is direct deposited or on your check each month, you multiply it by 10%, and you give that amount away. And the best way really to do this tithing is to set up a recurring donation. It just comes out of your account automatically, and you stop having to agonize over the decision every single month. It just becomes part of the budget. That's what I do when I make donations. Or you could also do a giving model like one of my colleagues. He's a youth director at a really large, couple thousand person church, and he donates 5% to the church, and then he creates a slush fund with the other 5%. He puts it into a savings account. And that savings account, that slush fund, is used for him because he's a youth director. Whenever 10 people come and ask him to buy Girl Scout cookies, he's able to say, yes, I'm going to do it. And he makes a generous purchase. He buys more than people expect, and he explains to them that he does this generous order because he sets aside money in his bank account to be a blessing to others, and he wants the youth to do the same as they get older. And so maybe you don't have the occupational hazard of 20 to 30 kids asking you to support every single school fundraiser, but you can still set aside 5% into a slush fund, a savings account to help fund things as needs arise. You can use that fund to do things like we're doing today, make a donation to the Atlanta Food Bank. You can do that to help people buy groceries, to buy someone who talks to you on the street something from the corner store or the gas station. Those are a couple of models of generosity, and if you're like me, then it's probably challenging to shift from this mindset of anxiety, this mindset of I'll never have enough, to a mindset of abundance. So I'm just going to close today with sharing how I was able to do it. First off, when it comes to giving financially, I started off real slow. When I moved to Atlanta, I began donating $50 a month to the collective and $50 a month to other charitable organizations. And when I give, I always set up, I said this before, those recurring monthly payments, and I set them up because if I had to think about giving every single month, I would convince myself that I can't afford it every single time, so I would never do it. So I have to have that. And in the last 2.5 years of living here, I've slowly but surely increased my giving every 6 months or so. And so today I give a little over $200 to the collective every month, and I give a little over $200 a month to other organizations who I think are doing quality work in our city. And I plan to increase that giving again in January, and I'll continue to increase it until I reach that biblical tithe, that 10% of my take-home pay. And I think this reflects that generosity, it's a spiritual practice, it's a discipline. It takes intentional effort, and I have to move slowly because it's not a practice I'm good at. Other spiritual practices come much more naturally to me, but giving really does not. And so if you're like me, it's okay to start slow. If you're not like me, just keep doing the thing. Like, keep giving. I wish I could be more like you. And so that's how I was able to shift my giving strategy, but here's also how I've been able to shift my actual mindset. I've been really inspired by people like Don Heath and by Aaron and Tim Murphy. And I really want to be as generous as they are. I want to give Don his flowers here. Don is the reason why we have the Abundance Fund at the Collective, giving 10% of our offerings away, because that was his idea. And I'm grateful for him for that. And the other thing is, I want to be as generous as these people, because when you are a leader of a nonprofit and you're the recipient of generosity time and time again, you start to understand, wow, people's generosity, it really has an impact. It impacts my life, it impacts our community's life too. And so the giving becomes contagious when I get to see folks who pour into this community. They've inspired me to give more to this church and to other organizations because I want to be more like Don and Aaron and Tim. And I'm also inspired by the people in this community. I've never really given to a church where I worked before, and I've never worked for a church that I wanted to attend before. And so I just always figured, I give enough of my time. I don't need to give money too, and I'm really inspired by what we do at this church though, so I want to give my money. I want to support our mission. I think we do a really great job of doing two things at once, of being a both and church, of both enjoying life and taking part in the pleasure that life offers and standing alongside our vulnerable neighbors. So I'm going to give just a couple of examples here. We're a church who can both host something like our Brunch and Blank series on the second Sunday of every month, where we invite 20-somethings to come and have a free brunch, alcohol and all. And the last one, 2 weeks ago, we had around 17 people attend, and around 15 of those were 20-somethings who attended brunch church, who talked with each other about budgeting and generosity, and how many churches have the opportunity to engage that many 20-year-olds on any given Sunday. And that's a testament to our church that does experimental things in order to engage new people in our community. But at the same time, we're able to do that, to have pleasure and enjoy each other's company, and on Sunday mornings, we're able to serve breakfast at Central Presbyterian Church. And this year alone, we served hundreds of meals to our neighbors at Central Presbyterian. And people have started to learn some of our neighbors' names and learn some of their stories. We are able to do two things at once. I'm inspired by the work we do at Central Presbyterian, so much so that in 2026, we have committed to being a monthly partner in distributing meals to our unhoused neighbors, of making breakfast for them, because we believe that we are a church that exists to stand with people on the margins. And that's why I give to this church. It's why I believe in this church, because we can do two things at once. We can live a pleasure-centered, joy-filled life together. And we can walk alongside the most vulnerable people in our community, letting them know that their life matters, and it matters to us. That is abundance. And so I'm going to close today with the big ask, because that's my job and that's what I get to do. And I just want to caveat this with this. If you're between jobs, if you're experiencing extreme financial distress, maybe this is not your season to give. Maybe this is your season to receive. Maybe it's our turn to take care of you. And remember that receiving another person's generosity, it's a spiritual practice that is holy and sacred, and it's totally okay. And so I'm really pleased to say that this year, the collective, through our Dare to Rise campaign, our campaign to try to help us become a self-sustaining church, that so far we have raised, and the graphic says $88,000, but as of today, we have raised more than $90,000 this year. We are only $20,000 away from our goal, and I really think we're going to crush it. And I think $125,000 is probably a more realistic figure for this church this year. And so if you've given to our church this year, if you've been part of our Dare to Rise campaign through your financial generosity, I want to thank you very much. You are helping transform the lives of people in our community. And if you haven't given yet, I just would ask that you consider how your gift can impact lives here in Atlanta and beyond. Consider the joy-filled life that all of us get to live together as a church and as a community. And just consider maybe making a gift. Maybe consider starting your first recurring gift that just comes out of the budget every single month as a spiritual practice of generosity. And lastly, I'll say this, which I shouldn't as the sort of executive director of this church, but don't just give to the collective, give to other charitable organizations too. Give to other organizations doing Jesus-aligned work across our city. Because here's the deal, and here's the most important part. We worship a God who tells us again and again that there is more than enough. We have plenty in this world to feed, house, and clothe every single person. We have enough. We have what we need. And so we just pray that God continues to transform the hearts of people who hoard their wealth. We pray that God will transform the hearts of people, that they'll see the needs of their neighbor and they'll meet them. We pray that we, in this community, will be people who love recklessly by giving generously. Giving generously of our finance, giving generously financially, giving generously of our time, giving generously to the people in our city who need it most. May we be people who give and give generously. Amen.